Well, now you all see why she's the famous Paola Antonelli.
Did I do a good time?
No, that was perfect. That was really fantastic. Thank you, Paola. I'd like to introduce our other speakers from earlier today and yesterday. Well, first of all, I will introduce Joseph Grima in the back over there, who will be moderating this session with me. Joseph did a really fantastic presentation today, earlier today also. He's currently editor-in-chief of Domus magazine, based in Milan, although he's his own identity is a little bit more fluid than that. Joseph was also the co-curator of the current Istanbul Biennial, which is up for another 2 weeks. And which has gotten a lot of great attention. Next to him is Dorian Chong, the Paola's colleague from MoMA, but Dorian is a curator in the painting and sculpture department. And he just opened a fantastic show called Tokyo 1955 to 70, a new avant-garde. And then O Ning, in the middle, is curator, activist, writer, currently the editor of Hutsuma magazine, but also working on a very interesting rural community project in Bishan in China, also the founding director of Get It Louder in Shanghai and Beijing, and also the director of, not the last one, but the 2009 Shenzhen Hong Kong Architecture Urbanism Biennial. Next to him is Wim de Wit, the head of the Department of Architecture and Contemporary Art at the Getty Research Institute in LA. And last but not least, Aric, the senior design editor at Mingpao Weekly here in Hong Kong. Maybe I'll just start off because, Paola was showing such great things, but it reminded me of all these fantastic projects that Aric was showing today by Hong Kong designers from the pages of Mingpao Weekly. I mean, and a lot of the issues that the designers she's been featuring really fit into your categories pretty well, Paola. There's a lot of interest in being responsible, humanitarian, certainly activist as well. I mean, Aric, maybe I'd like to hear some of your thoughts about how these Hong Kong designers are relating themselves to these broader global issues, or how they see themselves in relationship to them.
Yeah.
I think Hong Kong designer, we are very conscious about being. We constantly think about what's the difference between Hong Kong and mainland China, and also the rest of Asia, and also global, because we have been contacting different nations, or in every sort of economic way, or trading, or culturally, or everything. So Hong Kong designers are very conscious about that, and also I think at the same time they work many projects across the borders region, and also internationally as well. I think many designers, they do multidisciplinary creations, and also they're very concerned about local design as well. Yes.
One of the things that every time I see one of Paola's talks, I have this kind of strange tingling at the end, because I've suddenly realized or remembered or kind of been exposed once again to so many things that I had really not even considered to be design. And then I'm very much kind of immersed in the world of design, and kind of being continually reminded about the possibilities of design, and all of those little things that we take for granted on a daily basis, all of those assumptions we make about devices that we interact with, or processes that we experience, that we actually kind of forget that somebody has put a lot of thought into that, and that has actually opened up possibilities that, even though we completely take them for granted, once possibly did not exist. And I think that one of the really interesting things about design at the moment is actually this process of recognition and identification of possibilities. And I really think that that's something that you, Paola, have brought to design, and why it's so fantastic that you're in this position at MoMA and why so many people owe so much to you is because of this. Well, no, but I think it's a really important point, is actually kind of understanding the breadth of design, and it's something that I don't think we really ourselves as a kind of a discipline focus on enough. So I think it was very interesting this morning in your presentation, Dorian, how in a way you were this is something that you also kind of on a different time frame, whereas Paula kind of intercepts the present. A lot of what you were talking about was actually kind of understanding actively, retrospectively within the field of art in this kind of avant-garde, this period that you defined somewhat polemically as well, if I understood correctly, as a new avant-garde. Things that possibly at the time were it wasn't possibly to completely understand within a broader framework. And I was wondering whether you could talk a little bit about this. I think in a way design has also borrowed a lot from contemporary art and from the kind of this process of détournement, in a way, of removing things from its obvious context to examine it in a completely different way. Maybe you could talk a little bit about this relationship between contemporary art and design, and what fluxes you see kind of going on backwards and forwards there between the two.
Oh, I was afraid that this was going to come to me. I mean, it's a really difficult question. I very dutifully made a list of all the terms that Paula just gave us in our presentation, and I was trying to see if any of these terms actually apply to contemporary art, and I don't think I did very well. I think the list included maybe about 12 terms or so, about a dozen, and I was trying to see if any of these terms will be relevant to contemporary art, and I think I checked about 3 or 4. That's not to say that you know, these are really great qualities. That contemporary art does not have great qualities, but it made me think about how design, especially the way that you were talking about, the new frontiers in design, are expanding. And perhaps at the very beginning, when you were saying that if past design was about problem solving, then current design is about problem finding. And maybe it is that attitude that really opens up the horizon and looking for different kind of frontiers. And this is a gross simplification, but I do think that there are ways in which that contemporary art is, in a sense, is intentionally narrowing its own purview. I mean, it's a paradox. I mean, I actually see it in both ways. In a sense, it's a very promiscuous kind of discipline in the sense that it crosses very easily not only with design, but say moving image or many other disciplines. But the discursive purview of contemporary art works in a slightly different way, in a very different way, that it hones its points in a very minute way, in a kind of a calculus. I think it has something to do with ultimately non-functional nature of art making, and I could be, totally crucified for saying this, but I mean that's what I believe in, and art really, the way the contemporary art is that it defines itself non-functionally in a non-populist way, and I don't mean populist in a necessarily a negative way, but that's not to say that it's simply it uses its negative. Critical, negative in the sense of negation, and critical thinking to get to still a wholly human and universally human form. And I know that I'm speaking in total abstract, but like I know that people often talk about the meeting points between contemporary design and contemporary art, or contemporary fashion and art, and often I can't really see the relationships beyond pure kind of formal ways, and for me it's more interesting and productive to think in difference between the disciplines.
I wanted to move on quickly to another topic that I think is very important and quite urgent when considering an institution of the scale and ambition of M+, which is something that's kind of been lingering in the room over these 2 days and that we've kind of at moments addressed head on, but possibly I think could be taken a lot further, which is the whole problematic of how design can be displayed. And I think that it would be interesting to hear from Uning, who gave a very interesting presentation about how he actually used public space in the Shenzhen, Hong Kong Bi-City Biennial as a sort of a dispositif for projecting design into the everyday lives of many people. I think you took it to an extreme that it had been taken very few times before, and you probably would have liked to take it even further. And maybe it would be interesting to hear from you a little bit more about how you see that in relation to Hong Kong, a city which I think you know better than most of us, and what possibilities you see on the ground here.
Actually, I don't have too much idea about the museum development, but I heard a lot of very interesting discussion these couple of days about M+, how to develop M+. And I believe whatever museum or biennale should be a platform for the knowledge production. It should be not only set up a narrative of the history, but also should create some new knowledge to guide the history. So I'm really enjoy Paula's presentation because it provides a very good, very updated practice of the contemporary design. We can see a lot of young talent from Eindhoven, and also we should also see some very good idea and good design from ordinary people, not from the professional people. And when we're talking about sometimes about fashion design, it's not only about the fashion on the catwalk, but also including the protests in Occupy Wall Street. They invent a new uniform for the new generation of the protests. So actually, contemporary designs change a lot. We need to find a new knowledge structure to understand the update protest. So when we discuss what is Asia design, what is Hong Kong design, I really think sometimes it's make no sense. For example, just like Martino Camber, he was born in Italy and lived in London, but in 2007, when I invited him to Guangzhou to make the chair, he used the local material to make the chair. How can we define this design? It's Guangzhou design or Italian design or UK design? It's very, I mean, to define design in a traditional way, it's made no sense. But museum or biennale can provide a platform that we can invite a lot of artists, designers to deal with the local maybe social problem or situation with their knowledge. For example, I used to invite a UK artist, Matt Hope. Maybe I can call him an artist, but at the same time, we also can call him a designer. Today, actually, the boundary between art and design actually is blurred. And he found a lot of exercise machine device in different cities in China. And then he trying to invent a new, trying to redesign this exercise device and to collect the energy of the people and transfer to power and provide for the public lighting. So this is really, this design or production is really deal with the very Chinese situation. So how we can call this? Maybe we cannot call it a British design or we can. That means today we don't need to identify the design or art in with the nationality or the also, contemporary design is not only about a design object or creative physical space. It should be also trying to get involved in the social engagement and empowerment, trying to get involved in the social engineering and to contribute to make the social change. So in the future, museum or biennale or other art or design activity should focus on this. Thank you.
Yes, I have one thing I wanted to respond to your presentation as well. I think is for Mingpao Weekly, we don't name our design section as design in Chinese. We call it 生活烘干 because we believe that design help us to improve our quality of life and also help us to understand who we are, what our society is, and what's happening before, right now, or maybe probably in the future. And I think your presentation really demonstrates what design can be a perspective when we wanted to look into different issues in our cities, locally, globally, and etc. And from our experience, we always think that the Hong Kong perspective is very important, whatever topics we talk about, even from an industrial product, or we talk about a public space, or we talk about Hollywood Road, where we are doing the projects. I think in the end of the day, we really hope M+, or the Future Design Museum in Hong Kong, will help everyone to think about how we can improve the quality of life in Hong Kong. I really hope it can be a more positive energy generated from different places, because I think design is not just designers. We have a very big ecosystem and everyone is in it, not just designers. So that's I think it would be very good to think about it. Yeah.
Sorry. I am a little bit of a different kind of dealing with a different kind of design. I am an architecture historian. I'm an architecture curator, and deal with lots of designs, more according to the terms that Christine said at the end of her talk about design as diseño, the drawing that leads to an object, a product, meaning the building. And I certainly hope that M+ will also continue to incorporate that kind of work in its collections. Many of the terms that Paula used are, of course, also apply to architecture, and especially the humanizing aspect, or whatever the term was that you used, is always there. It is about creating an environment for a human shelter or workspace. And I think that there are also, whether it's Asian design or architectural design in general, architectural design in this part of the world, architectural design in relation between this part of the world and other parts of the world, that these things need to be studied and they need to be part of your activities at the museum. And in the end, we talked a lot about needing distance, or who has the right to deal with a certain topic. And I think it is, as a curator, one has the liberty and the right to take on any topic, and one has the obligation to do it as well as possible. One will make mistakes, and one will learn from these mistakes, and then somebody else will take it from there and will do the next project. So I certainly hope that also in this architectural field you will continue to work in M+, and that we will all be able to make connections between our institutions in the United States and yours here in Hong Kong.
I had a quick question for you, Wim, before you put down the microphone about, I mean, architecture is necessarily slightly more slow-moving than design, and design has been through a kind of a, simply in the last generation, an accelerated change that's sometimes difficult to wrap one's head around, and architecture is a little bit more slow-moving. But I was thinking the other day when you showed us an incredibly beautiful drawing that's part of your collection as an illustration of some of the problematics that you face when you decide whether to acquire or not a drawing. And actually, architectural drawing and representation itself has been one of, is something that's actually been in very rapid transformation in the last years, how one actually represents architecture itself. And in Paula's project, Paula's presentation, for example, she showed a project that really kind of turns a lot of the architectural canons on its head. Yeah. Is that something that you as an institution acknowledge or attempt to embrace, and how would you tackle that?
Yes, well, we definitely, in our institution, I feel I always need to explain, people know the Getty Museum better than the place where I work with, the Getty Research Institute. The Getty Museum does not go any further than December 31st, 1899. They don't deal with any 20th century or 21st century. We in the Research Institute feel we can go up to the most modern time, and we do acquire contemporary materials in artistic documentation, but also in the architectural environment. But again, as you say, the architectural environment is slower. It's also the materials that become available, in general, become more slowly available. We do not deal so much with the architectural materials that show up on the art market, but we deal with the materials that come from the architects' offices. And these most contemporary materials are going to be in their archives for a while. So we have to deal with all the digital products that come out of architects' offices. Also the total reconsidering of what is architecture in fact, and how do we approach architectural design, and what can we do with architectural design. All these questions we are willing to consider, but the products that will the researchers will allow researchers to work with them are not yet going to be available, and it's going to be another 10 years or so. Just a very simple example, most architects' offices changed to the digital design medium around 1995, 96. But also, these are all firms that are still very active. Things do show up once in a while because at the end of somebody's career that somebody changed, but most of that material is still in the firms, and it gives us more time actually to think about how to deal with it, because it is a big problem to just physically maintain those materials and make sure that when they change from one computer in an office to our computers, that they are still readable and people can still work with it. So we have some time there, but we do not avoid the problem.
Maybe we should, I think we have time for maybe one or two questions. Who shot up their hand first? Yes, here. Oh, sorry.
Hi, yeah, thank you. I wanted to touch on this question of the distinction and the similarities, connection between art, contemporary art and contemporary design. But also I wanted to bring up perhaps another relationship between design and architecture. Because actually, Aric, your title is Design and Architecture. And they're both design disciplines. So just interested in people's views.
Well, just because I remember Paula and I had a talk a few months ago where where this actually came up, where she was like, I've been arguing with Momo that architecture is actually part of design, and her title ought to be Design and Architecture, even though it's Architecture and Design, and mine is, anyway.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I studied architecture, and I had as professors some of the best designers in history, like Achille Castiglioni and Marco Zanuso. It used to be like that in Italy, and Castiglioni used to always say that Italian design was so good because there were no design schools. Right? And so you were taught this kind of approach that could work at any scale in any context. And for that reason, I believe that architecture is part of design. Of course, this is a nice way to say it. It doesn't always work that way. But in history, architecture and design are really tied at the hip. And in moments in history, it's architecture taking design by the hand, and in other moments, it's design taking architecture by the hand. It was like that in the 1960s for a while, and it's like that now. In a way, design is thinking of all the framework, the intellectual framework, and also the manufacturing framework, the productive framework that architecture will follow in the future, and it's already kind of doing that. Of course, if we look at the artifacts themselves, they seem completely different, and architecture, of course, is much more impressive. It's big, and it's like one object only, so the implications are different, but they live together well. Say something else?
Yeah,
do you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I think I do think that the relationship is very close. I don't care if it's design and architecture or architecture and design. There are many institutions that now call themselves DNA because it sounds like DNA. Design and architecture place the design first. I think the relationship is so close because it is in general about objects. Except that in architecture, the object is very large. And architects have, going back to somewhere in the 19th century, thought about themselves as the mother of all design. And so Okay.
Any more?
Hi. We've heard tonight that Hong Kong designers are quite practical and down to earth. So that could be a bad thing, but that could be also a good thing. So maybe M+ design should be also a more practical museum. And for example, the side of the museum should be dedicated to solving problems. And when you do, exhibition, it could be an exhibition. So for example, how to tackle the pollution. And you could ask Hong Kong designers, Chinese or non-Chinese, to come up with solution. And that could be, also a way of anchoring the museum in the, everyday life and just proposing very practical solution as well.
Sure. I mean, I think, I hope we've given the impression that there will be some sort of advocacy side to what we will do at M+. But I think we need to draw a distinction between design as problem solving and design as in a broader framework. Problem solving is definitely part of design, and I think we will definitely contribute, we hope, to discussions of various issues in Hong Kong. But there are a lot of organizations and design organizations here already who are doing that kind of work, and we don't want to duplicate them. And our advocacy of design, we hope, will include problem solving as part of that, but expand the perceptions, definitions, understandings of design to be much more than problem solving. And given that we're part of a museum of visual culture, I think we are that notion of visual culture, again, however we define it, and maybe this is another symposium topic, should inform how we go about that as well. Does that make sense? Or yeah, okay. Yeah. Sure, of course. I think one more. Yeah, this gentleman over here.
Thank you. I thought I would challenge the view that was just expressed, and perhaps that you were endorsing as well, and that is, should M+ really be reflective of Hong Kong as a geography or not? and I think you've expressed some, both panels have talked about difficulty of defining what Asian is. I think you've talked about the difficulty of understanding what Hong Kong design is. Sure. You have representatives from MoMA, and when you think about MoMA, you don't think of it as New York in any way other than the fact it's physically located there, and yet it's made New York what it is by having its point of view. So I wonder whether M Plus is going to be a Hong Kong museum, or is M Plus going to be transcendental the way MoMA is as it relates to New York?
Well, I'd like to. MoMA has a very complicated, has its own sort of complicated story, but and we can talk about that later. But to focus on M Plus and its relationship with Hong Kong, it's funny. Just my third day on the job here, I was on this stage for the London Global Design Forum that London Design Festival organized. And the last question for all the panels was, I think it was, in 20 years, come up with 2 adjectives that you would use to describe how Hong Kong should be. I think someone said passionate, and someone said, I don't know, probably efficient or convenient or something like that. And then it came to me, and I was thinking about it, and I finally couldn't come up with an adjective, and I said, well, I don't have an adjective, but I will just say Hong Kong. Those are the 2 words that's what Hong Kong should be in 20 years. I mean, this issue of identity, I think, is one that we don't want to. We want to deal with in an authentic way, right? And what is Hong Kong? I mean, I don't think anybody in this room has the right to or authority to say that, because Hong Kong is made up of many things and many different people, and it always has been. That being said, we're here. We are here every single day, and we will be talking to all of you and other people every single day. And of course, we will be a museum in Hong Kong, for Hong Kong, from the perspective of Hong Kong, because that is our perspective. We are in Hong Kong. How that sort of translates into a collection, well, let's see, but that takes time. And now Shirley is telling me to cut it short. And actually, we are over. But maybe this is a good way to sort of end this, which is, I sort of hope that everyone leaves here as lost and confused as possible, because that it's that confusion that I think allows us to sort of look at new things in new ways and move things forward. I mean, certainty. As an institution, and plus, Lars just gave a talk about recently about uncertainty and why it's important, and it is. Now,
I just wanted to add, yes. Confusion permeated by curiosity, though.
Absolutely, curiosity.
What Paula, our curious octopus, brings to the table is this kind of multi-tentacled approach that's this kind of profound curiosity that I think an institution must have to.
Absolutely, and use, to describe designers, we hope can apply to design curators as well. Open, responsible. Maybe a little.
Now that we're talking about confusion, it's all very exciting, actually, because. I think it's also important to note that because there are 2 representatives from MoMA, that I think maybe there's some assumption that we're representing a certain model that is decided and it's unchanging, but that's not true at all. I often joke that when we have anywhere between 2.5 million people to 3 million visitors per year, then maybe 80%, and then we're presenting something like upwards of 40 exhibitions a year, in addition to the permanent collection, but maybe 80% of the people are coming to see Van Gogh's Starry Night and Monet's Water Lilies. And that's just a joke, but I think there's some truth to that. However, the museum may have been established as an institution that is presenting the progress of modern art. And I'm specifically just talking about art and not design and architecture. But when you talk about modern art, it's established to follow the progress and structure the knowledge of its history, starting from the 1870s, post-impressionism on. And the way that it has written its history started very specifically from Paris and has followed its course to New York. So it is true that it has been established on a very Western-centric axis. But what we have discussed, at least what I did in our internal workshop, is that there have been many other elements. The institution has been struggling with the question of internationalism. And modern art from Japan, modern art from, and especially in the 60s, from Turkey or Iran, and have been part of the content and programs and collection of the institution. And we are now in the process of doing an archaeology of that very complicated history that has been kind of forgotten and has gone under the surface. So that's a way of saying that it might seem from outside that we know what we're talking about, and we may perhaps 70% of the time, but there's a lot of internal thinking that intentionally creates confusion so that we can challenge the knowledge structure that we have internally.
So on that note, I would like to thank all of our speakers, especially Joseph and Victor for helping us moderate, and of course Christine and Paolo for their fantastic talks. Really, all of our speakers were amazing and gave fantastic talks. And again, they will be, their papers will be posted online on the mplusmatters.hk website shortly. We also have to thank Shirley and I also have to thank our other M+ colleagues, Tobias Berger, the managing curator, of course Lars, who spoke earlier, Stella, Winnie, and Yen from education, and all of our other colleagues who all helped a lot. Pauline and Pili, I see right there. Again, this is just the beginning. As we could pull about 30 workshops out of this one, but we wanted to present this sort of broader snapshot, and that represents all the various different facets that we are going to be looking at. And it's a sort of, and in creating this sort of constellation of starting points, we hope to continue to engage all of our friends from everywhere and here in Hong Kong. And again, thank you all for coming, and we will look forward to the next time. Thanks.